What does God want from us? Because I was not a Christian until I was almost 30, and when I grew up, what I thought God wanted from me was a good boy. I thought God wanted to be in the way of my sex life and my fun life and all the things I wanted to do, and that's pretty much what I thought. I thought the church was put here to keep order in society and to make money, and maybe there was a God, maybe there wasn't a God, but I saw God as kind of a giant umpire, right, or referee up in heaven throwing flags and saying, you're having too much fun down there, right? And part of the reason I got that idea was because of growing up. I guess you could say I went to church occasionally or something like that. I lived in America, and at the time that I was young, 50 years ago when I was born, a little bit more, that if you grew up in America, you knew a little something about Christianity, or you thought you did, and you thought that God wanted you to be a good boy, good girl, and you knew some Bible stories maybe from a kid, going to Sunday school maybe, and you thought that, or at least I thought that the Bible was a book of people to emulate, heroes of the faith. Particularly this guy we're going to look at today, Abraham, or Abram, as his name is right now, and God will change it eventually. But if you ever had those kind of ideas, we already looked at how he pimped out his wife Sarah for money and got rich in Egypt. And then we're going to look at something today, and it's probably like the worst day of his life. And basically, we're going to see that he, anyway, you wouldn't call this guy probably a hero of the faith if this was all you knew about him, basically, or the father of our faith, right? And so what does God want from us? And like I said, I thought he wanted me to behave. I thought he wanted me to, conform, that he wanted me to do certain things, follow the rules, and don't break those rules, obey these rules. And we're going to see that what he's looking for is something a little bit different. And it's a weird story because we're going to see Father Abraham get a young girlfriend today, which doesn't seem like, the kind of thing that you would... This isn't the story I remember from Sunday school, right? That's kind of the issue, right? That I don't remember this story at all, right? But it's a crazy story, and it really reminds me a lot of my family, because my family is all jacked up. I've got aunts and uncles that are 10 years younger than me, and my grandfather had like one family with my dad in it, and then had another family after that, and then another family after that. And about 10 years ago, I went to his funeral. I didn't even meet him until I was about 10 years old. And I went to his funeral, and one of his older sons is a pastor, and I was a pastor, and they asked the two of us to say something at the funeral home, and it was just crazy and jacked up because this family hated this family, and this family hated that family, and these kids were, and it was crazy. And at the end of that, the funeral, the craziest, Jerry Springer kind of thing I've ever seen, right? And so, this gives me hope for my family when you hear this story, okay? But what does God want from us? Because maybe I know we have some of them here, maybe they're not here today, but we have women who aren't married, and they want a spouse. They are looking for a husband, and maybe they're Christians. I know that they are, some of them, and they've struggled because they've thought to themselves, there's no Christian guys, or there's no good Christian guys, and I just can't find one, and I've looked all over, and you know what? What am I going to do? Because I know he wants me to find a good guy, but there aren't any, so I'm going to find somebody, right? Maybe you're a teen who's in trouble. Been there, right? Like maybe it's drug trouble, or maybe it's trouble, you've gotten in trouble with the law, or something like that, or you've gotten in trouble in some other way, and you don't know what's going to happen to you. It's time to face the piper, basically, right? You're going to court, you've been caught, whatever it is, got brought home by the police in the back of the car, or whatever happened, and what do, right? Maybe you're unemployed and you're struggling because you lost your job, and now you're thinking, what comes next? Where's God in all of this? Why am I going through this, right? Or maybe you're a person who's sick. Maybe you're a person who's struggling with something else. Maybe you're suffering in some way, because of an illness, because of fear, or maybe because of something else. And everybody we know, including us, right, have struggled in one way or another. And it seems like sometimes that we go through our lives, and we have these trials, and we have these things that we go through, and it seems like no sooner do we get through one that we're experiencing another one. Not long after. It's not like we have one trial in our life and we overcome that trial and the rest of our life it's smooth sailing. It's like we go from one issue to another. And then eventually maybe we have a good season for a little while, and then we fall into something else, and we forget all about those other things because now this is the biggest thing in our life and the biggest thing that we're struggling with. Throughout our lives, we find ourselves struggling with these situations like this, but why? I mean, I struggled a lot as a kid, and then I struggled as a young adult, and I'm still struggling today. We all have these issues that we go through. Why do we go through these struggles? I mean, especially because if you're a Christian, you think, well, how does God treat his friends? He should treat them better than he treats other people, right? I mean, maybe non-Christians or people who don't believe in God or atheists or something, right? Satanists or something, maybe they should struggle like this, but why would God treat his friends this way? Because, if God has the ability to change these situations, why doesn't he? Why is it that I go through one trial of my faith, one test, one thing, and then not long later, I go through another one, and no sooner do you catch your breath than maybe you go through something else, right? And sometimes life is like that. And if God has the ability to change these situations, why doesn't he change them? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to talk about it in the context of this crazy story with Abraham. And let me recap for you a little bit, but just so you know, Abraham is considered the father of our faith, right? He was like the prototype of a person who was saved not through his behavior, not through what he did, but through trusting God. That is, believing God, that God made him a promise, he believed that promise, and God credited it to him. We looked at last week or the week before. He credited it to him as righteousness, meaning a right standing with God, meaning he did lots of bad things. He did lots of boneheaded moves, right? He wasn't always right with God by his own standing, but God credited a right standing with him through his belief, I guess you could say. And so we looked at the life of Abraham. We looked at he had an ungodly dad. He came from an ungodly city. He had an ungodly life, right? He had sin. He had failures of faith in his life, but he was right with God because of what he believed. And one of the things that God made him a promise about was that he was going to give him a son. And at this point in his life, Abraham is an old man, and he has no children. And him and his wife have no children. And 10 years earlier, God had made a promise to him saying, I'm going to give you a boy, right? I'm going to give you a child, right? And then we looked at last week that God promised him that he's going to give, or the week before, that God had promised him again. And he said that, I'm going to give you a son from your own loins, basically, right? Like you're not going to have to adopt. It's not going to be, your heir is not going to be a servant in your house. It's going to be your own flesh and blood, right? And Abraham believed him. But time has gone on. It's been 10 years now, right? And his wife, Sarai, who now is 75 at this point, she's getting a little antsy. And she has no baby, right? And her biological clock is a tick, tick, ticking, right? Remember that movie, right? Anyway, so Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, and that's an issue because they have no heir. And Abraham and his wife are rich, right? They have all kinds of things. God has blessed them greatly, but he didn't give them a kid. And even though he promised a kid, they didn't have one. And now Sarai is going to take matters into her own hands because God isn't moving fast enough. God isn't delivering. Like, you get an F, God, because, you haven't done what you promised to do, and you didn't do it fast enough when I wanted it. And so what happens is Sarai takes this Egyptian slave named Hagar, right? She had an Egyptian slave named Hagar, and it's not slave like we think of. She's kind of a servant, but she's like a personal servant. So it's kind of like she would have been treated very well, and since Sarah was rich, she would have been dressed very well, and she would have taken care of. She would have been like a personal servant, like one of the closest people to her. Kind of like if you ever think of old books or old movies where there's royalty and the princess has like that one person, that other girl that goes with her everywhere and maybe does her planning and does all things, like maybe helps get her dressed and do all of these things, but she's also dressed well and makes decisions and commands in the house. That's probably kind of maybe the way that it worked in that situation. But she wasn't free, and notice this, she's Egyptian. So where did she come from? Egypt. So how did they get her? It was when Sarah and Abram went down to Egypt, right, and pimped her out, came back with all kinds of stuff, because not a good thing, right? But that's how they came up with this girl. That's why they have this woman, this young woman. And So she said to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. So who does Sarah blame for the fact that she has no kids? God, right? It's God's fault. It's his fault. You know, he didn't give me any kids. He didn't give me to me fast enough. And he gets an F, fail, because I wanted them and I didn't get them, right? And so the Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. And see, if you read Mesopotamia, which you don't, nobody does, right? But if you ever looked into history and you read Mesopotamian kind of history back in this time period, there's a thing called the Code of Hammurabi, or Hammurabi. Am I pronouncing it right, Kim? Very good. Okay. And if you look in there, one of the things that they say, this would have been law and custom at that time, that if someone didn't have a child, right, if a woman was barren, then the guy could marry other women, right? And if they were rich, then what they would do like this is the guy wouldn't marry multiple wives like polygamy, but what he would do is the wife would take her closest servant and give it to the husband, you know, and if she had a baby, it was considered the wife's baby, I guess you could say, and she became kind of the concubine of the husband, right? And so this is what's going on here. Not a good thing, but there was a thing in their culture, and you're going to see it's going to go completely sideways. So imagine this, though. So Abraham's 85 at this point, right? And Sarah's 75 around, okay? And the Lord kept them from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. What does Abraham say? Oh, no, honey. He doesn't say that, does he? He says, Abraham agreed with Sarah. That's like the shortest sentence in there, right? Like, there's no fighting. There's no arguing. There's nothing, right? It's like, honey, I'm a family man, and if you need me to do that, that's what I'll do, right? No arguing. Go sleep with a 19, 20-year-old, 25-year-old woman when you're 85, right? And the wife is 75, right? Here's the problem. He listened to his wife, right? Instead of who was he supposed to be listening to? Remember? God. God's the one that made him the promise, but Sarah can't wait, and she's got to go about and figure out this on her own time, in her own way, because God's not pulling through quick enough, right? So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarah, that's 10 years since he got the promise and all of that, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her, so see, she gives her to him, right, to be her husband, or to her husband to be his wife. Now, it's not wife, like they never actually get married or anything like that. But basically, it was like, okay, wife number 2. And if you have wife number 2, that's one too many wives, right, women? Any of you who are married? Right. You don't hear this the other way, because one of the guys would have to die, right? That's what happens if there were one woman and 2 wives. One of the guys would have to die. I can't even live in the same house with my adult son, right? That's too many adult men in one house, okay? Anyway, so Hagar gave her to his husband to be her wife. He slept with Hagar, and she conceived. So here's what Sarai wants. Sarai wants a baby, desperately wants a baby. Hagar, right, maybe she's a little bit of a gold digger even. I mean, she's a young woman. She's a servant in the house. And hey, she's getting a promotion. She's going from servant to wife number 2. And, instead of having nothing, like, my son is going to be the heir. And he is, Abram is a rich man, right? We've already talked about how rich he was. So, it's a step up for her too. She's like, hey, I'm getting what I want, like I'm getting a promotion here, and so far, and what is Abraham getting? Well, we're not even going to talk about that, right? He's getting a young girlfriend, apparently, right? But everybody's getting what they want, aren't they? Kind of. It sort of seems that way. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Of course, what could go wrong with that plan, right? Oh, I'll just give my husband another wife, and we'll all be one big happy family, right? Not going to work that way. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. So, imagine this, here's the 75-year-old, Sarai with Abraham, and then Hagar is there, and she's like, oh, honey, my shoulders are sore. Maybe you could rub them for me, because I am pregnant with your baby, Well, where does that leave his wife? You know what I mean? Kind of left out, right? Like, well, if your other wife was good enough to get pregnant, you wouldn't be in this situation, but I am, And so, like, it seems like maybe by despising her like this, she's trying to push Sarah out of the picture and become wife number one instead of wife number two. You know what I mean? So when she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abram, "You are responsible." So first of all, who was responsible for Sarai not getting pregnant? Well, it was God, right? Now, who's responsible now for the suffering that she has? Abraham, right? Or Abram, right? You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me. See, she never talks about God or says, well, what is God's will? Or what would God have me do? Or I'm waiting for God because he promised me this. No, until like she's upset. And then she's going to say, oh, the Lord should judge between me and you. May he curse you for what you've done to me, right? So interesting, but that happens, right? So your slave is in your hands, Abraham said. So rather than protecting the woman that he's sleeping with, who's supposedly his wife number two, right? Rather than saying, well, we need to protect her. I mean, she's pregnant with my baby. Like we're going to give her a name and we're going to do this and that and the other thing, right? We're not doing that, right? What he does is says, oh, honey, she's yours again. She's your slave. She's not my concubine, not my wife number two, not that here. She's yours. She's in your hands, right? So he hands her over to Sarai, right? And Abraham said, she's in your hands. Do with her whatever you think is best, because you're the one really in charge, right? Do whatever you think is best. Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. So now what happens? Well, everybody got what they want, right? Sarai got a baby coming, right? And Hagar got a promotion. Now she's a wife, and her son is going to be the heir to all this fortune. And, Abraham got a son and a young girlfriend, right? Everybody got what they want, and now everybody is miserable. You ever had that situation or know anybody in that situation? That sounds like my life sometimes, right? Totally. Like, I wanted it, and when I got it, I was like, this is not what I bargained for. This is not what I expected, right? So your slave is in your hands, Abram said, right? And then she's mistreated, and she leaves. She runs away. What a mess, right? It's a huge mess. Now, who's the innocent party in all of this? Like nobody, right? Like they're all guilty. They're all jacked up. They've all got issues and problems, right? They're all sinners, right? And none of them are, concerned at this point about what does God want? What does God think that we should do? Or what is, like nobody's even really asking, right? And so what happens at this point? Well, here's what happens. The angel of the Lord, all right? And just so you know, you don't have to agree with me with this, but this is the first occasion where this occurs in the Old Testament, in Genesis, but particularly in the Old Testament, where whenever the language says an angel of the Lord, it's a messenger from God, right? Like an angel that God sends or somebody, right, that is a messenger for God, okay? But when it says the angel of the Lord, oftentimes it seems to say that it's deity. In other words, it's God himself, perhaps. And some people even think that it is a pre-incarnation of Jesus, like it's God as a man or a figure speaking here. And we're going to see that the reason that I think this is, particularly in this situation, is because no angel accepts worship as the Lord. Like any angel that works for God, right? Like doesn't accept, oh yes, bow down and worship me or call me the Lord or something like that, right? But this person, right, or this character, I guess you could say, does. And whenever it says the angel of the Lord, oftentimes you could almost plug in God and it would all make sense there, or plug in Jesus, right, Son of God, and it would all make sense there. So the angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And here's the point. You know where she's going? The road to Shur, it goes back to Egypt. She's going home to mama, right? Like she's like, that's it, I'm out of here. He blew it again, right? I'm out of here and I'm going home to mom, right? Or whatever. But she's a pregnant woman, a young pregnant woman, taking this long road now, right? Going all the way back to Egypt, and you know what? She's in danger. Like she could be killed, she could be raped. She may not make it. She probably won't make it. And if she does go back, she now has, I guess you could say, in some ways, she wouldn't be accepted by her own people because she's got a biracial child. She's pregnant and with no dad, she's going to be destitute, and nobody's really going to care about her. Do you know who cares about her? God. Like, God shows up to her on the way and talks to her, and so the angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert, and it was the spring that is beside the road to shore. And is she an innocent woman? Nope. I mean, no, right? Nobody in the thing is really innocent, right? And he said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where are you coming from and where are you going? She says, I'm running away from my mistress Sarai, she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress and submit to her. That's what we all love to hear, right? Go back, right? But she's going to go back because she's in danger. If she doesn't listen, right, she's in danger. She could be raped. She could be killed. All these things. The baby could never be born. All of these things, right? Or the baby could grow up without a dad, and that's not preferable either, right? She's going to go back, and you know what? Abraham's going to raise this child. He's going to love this child, right? And it's not going to be one big happy family, but it's going to be the making the best of a bad situation. Sometimes you make the best of a bad situation, right, when you listen to the Lord. I'm not saying that in every situation, sometimes the dad is abusive or something like that, but in this particular case, Abraham is going to raise the kid. He's going to love the kid, and Abraham's going to be a good dad to this kid, right? So submit to her, go back, right? Don't cause the troubles you were causing, right? Go back, and then he says more to it. He says, the angel added, I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. So first of all, the angel is saying, I will increase. Well, who's this? God does that, right? It's not an angel that does that. And so he's going to increase the number of descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. That sounds a lot like the promise that was given to Abraham, doesn't it? About his descendants. It does, right? Sounds just like it, actually. And the angel of the Lord also said to her, you are now pregnant and you will give birth to a son. Not a puppy, right? We talked about this before too. Not a cat, right? But a son, a baby, right? So, you shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your misery. In other words, Ishmael, by the way, the name means God hears me, or God hears, or something like that. And so that's what the name means. You shall give him the name Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your misery. It's like, well, I didn't know anybody was even paying attention to me. I didn't know that anybody was aware of my suffering, of my pain, of what I've been through, of the mistreatment that I've been under, right? But the Lord heard her misery. And then he talks about the baby when the baby grows up, and he says, he will be a wild donkey of a man. Love that. Right? How many people want to have a wild donkey of a man for a son, right? You know what that means, right? I mean, anyway. So he's going to be a wild donkey of a man, and he's going to wander. He's going to be nomadic. He's going to go wherever he wants to. And by the way, he is the father of most Arabs, because Arabs are named, I guess you could say, for settling in Arabia, and a lot of the people who settled in Arabia, we call them Arabs, but technically they're not all Arabs, but he is the father of many of the Arabs, of what we call Arabs, right? And he's also the father of what the heck is it? It is Islam, but Muslims. There you go, Muslims, right? So he's the father of the Muslims, and Islam wasn't started, by the way, until 700 years after Christ. So Islam is actually younger than Christianity by 700 years. But But that's who this man is, Ishmael, and that's who they trace their ancestry back to. And that's how it is that three nations actually come from this man, Abraham. That the Jews come from Abraham. There's no Jews yet, right? And the Muslims come from Abraham, or Islam traces their roots back to Abraham. And Christians also trace their root back to Abraham. And so many nations, just like God said, came from Abraham, right? So he's heard her misery. He'll be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone and everyone's hand against him. In other words, he's going to be a fighter, right? He's going to be, I would say it like this, like he's a guy with a chip on his shoulder. He's going to be a guy with a chip on his shoulder and his finger on the trigger, right? Like a hair trigger and, a chip on his shoulder. And he's just going to be hostile with everybody, right? And he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. And isn't it funny that the descendants of this man, right? Like they live in hostility against their brothers, whether they're Jewish or whether they're Christian, right? That the Muslims, for the most part, not all of them, but they live in hostility toward, those other two brother nations, I guess you could say, or peoples, actually religions, but that's a different issue. But so it's funny that 4,000 years ago, we can trace it back to that. And you know what? There's been problems in that area of the world, right? And between Muslims and Christians and Jews for all of those years, dating all the way back to then. It's kind of crazy, right? I know, you're getting mad at me, and somebody's going to say, oh, no, you can't make any jokes about that, right? About Islam and that because it's a peaceful religion. Like if you say the wrong thing, they'll find a piece of you over there and a piece of you over there. But I know somebody's going to pick at me and be mad. But the deal is, it's funny that 4,000 years ago, that's what Moses wrote, and it came out to be true, didn't it? It wasn't at the time. He was just a baby at the time, wasn't even born yet, but it turned out to be true, and true of his descendants, that there's hostility between them, all right? She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her, "You are the God who sees me." So this is the only time I can think of in all of Scripture where a person gives a name to God, and she gives a name to him, and she says, "You are the God who sees me." For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. In other words, she's saying, just like you and me, well, oftentimes we go through our lives and we go through these issues and we have these problems and we have these things going on and we're thinking to ourselves, does anybody even know? Where's God? Does anybody hear what's going on? Does anybody hear my prayers? Does anybody hear my story? Does anybody know when I'm suffering? And God shows up to her and it's like, okay, God is the God who hears me. And God is the God who sees me and sees my misery and sees what I've been through. That is why the well was called Bir Lahoroi, which a beer well. That's great, right? That's awesome. Anyway, but it's not that kind of beer well. It means the well of the God who sees, all right? But it's still there between Kadesh and Bered. So don't go looking for it, John. And so Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had bore. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. And that's kind of the end of it. But let me ask you this. Who's the hero in this story? All Bible stories have a hero, right? Oh, be like Abraham, right? Don't be like Abraham. Don't be like Abraham at all, because my grandfather was like Abraham. Don't be like that. All right? Who's the hero in this account? It's not Abraham. Is it Sarah? No. Is it Hagar? No, it's God, right? God is the only hero in the story, right? Are any of the three of these people innocent victims? Because, first of all, Sarah says, well, first of all, it's God's fault. I'm just an innocent victim. I can't have kids. And then when my husband's mistress turns against me, well, this is my husband's fault now because I gave my servant to my husband to be another wife to have children, and now she turns against me. I'm just an innocent victim. Is she a victim? No. And then how about Hagar? Hagar, tries to, it seems to be, usurp the role of wife and push, Abraham's wife, Sarai, out of the picture. And she's not really innocent either in the whole thing. She could have said, no, I don't want to sleep with your husband. I'll stay as your maid, But that didn't happen, right? None of them are innocent victims. Maybe the baby is an innocent victim, right? Maybe, or he was, but in this story, or in this account, all three of them are guilty. All three of them are sinful. None of the three, are looking at, what would God have me to do, right? None of them, right? Did they all get what they wanted? They kind of did, didn't they? It's funny because Sarah got a baby, Abraham got a baby and a girlfriend, what? Hagar, right. I can't keep the name straight. Anyway, Hagar, right, she became a wife, at least for a while. She's going to have a baby. Her son is going to be an heir, right? And so, they all seem to get what they want, but yet it didn't work out the way they expected, did it? None of them were really happy. And they're not going to be all one big happy family, but because Hagar is the one who listened to the Lord, right, and obediently decided to place herself, that God heard me, God saw me, I'm not alone, He's sending me back, and you know what? I'm trusting myself that He'll be the one who protects me, that, okay, this will be okay, these things are going to work to some degree, right? I mean, it's not going to be one big happy family, but I'm trusting myself, placing myself in His, care, I guess you could say, and it's going to work out, right? Somewhat, anyway. There's going to be consequences, right? And there's still consequences even today because of it, between the descendants of them. Anyway, but what did God want from them? He wanted them to recognize their dependence on Him. Over and over and over again, through all of these stories, especially like with Abraham and Sarah, you're going to see that Abraham and Sarah's faith, right, whether or not they depend on God in faith, is tested over and over and over again. And sometimes they fail, and sometimes they pass, right? A lot of times they blow it, sometimes they pass it, right? So what does God want from us? Well, He wants us to recognize our dependence on Him. So if you're the unmarried woman, right? If you're the teen who's in trouble, the unemployed person, the sick person, the struggling person, right? Whatever it is, right? We go through these things in our lives, these situations, right? And God has the ability to change them, but He doesn't change them. He allows us to go through them. In fact, He hasn't promised us a life with no suffering. There's going to be suffering in life, and life is going to be hard, and it's going to be painful. But He wants us to continually recognize our dependence on Him. Hagar was completely dependent on Him. She's walking home, and she's a single woman in the wilderness who's pregnant, and anything could happen to her. And even once she got home, if she did make it home, there's no guarantee that she's going to be taken in by anybody or anything good is going to come of what happened. She's completely dependent on Him, and she recognizes her dependence, and she decides, you know what? I need to obey the Lord. I'm going back the way He told me, and I'm going to trust in His dependence, or depend on Him and His promise that the things that He promised will come to pass. And you know what? It's not all going to be good. It's not all going to be roses and butterflies and puppies, but you know what? It's going to be making a bad situation the best of a bad situation, I guess you could say, by depending on Him and what He's said. See, here's the problem, though. You and I hate to be dependent. I hate to be dependent. I had surgery last Tuesday, and I've got a bunch of stitches in my leg. And I was having trouble yesterday because I had to go to something, and I could not bend down without my stitches because it was like I had pants too tight on, and the stitches were kind of, my wife had to say, let me put your boot on, and she's helping with me with my boot and stuff like that because I can't squat all the way down. And I was like, oh, no, I can do it. I didn't want to admit that, yeah, it would be easier if you did it for me. And eventually she wound up doing it for me, and I'm like, thank you. But I appreciated her doing it, but I don't like to admit that I can't do something myself. And I think most people are probably like that in a lot of ways. That we don't want to admit that we can't do it ourselves, or you know what? I need to be dependent on somebody else. In fact, that's some people's greatest fear as they get older. What am I going to do when I can't do it for myself, and somebody's got to take care of me? Somebody's got to do things that I used to be able to do for myself that I can't do anymore. We hate to be, dependent. We all want to be independent, right? We want to be able to take care of ourselves. And when we're in those situations where we can't fix it ourselves, we're waiting on God to do it, We want to solve our own problems, and we want to solve them right now, right? We want to solve it right now. When we have to wait for God, we get frustrated with God. God's not quick enough. God gets an F. God didn't take care of this. God didn't fix that. How come I'm so sick? How come this is going on? How come that's going on? Why don't I have a husband yet? Or why don't I have a wife? Or how come I have no kids, right? Whatever it is. Rather than recognizing our dependence on Him, on God, right? We come up with our own plans, and we're just going to help God the way that Sarah helped God, right? Well, I'll come up with my own plan, and my husband will have a child, and I'll have a baby, and this will all be great, right? And we try to help God, and we take matters into our own hands, and oftentimes it leads to unintended consequences for us and for our descendants, just like it did with Abraham, right? Why does God seem to test their faith, though, over and over and over again? Because we've seen Him test their faith a bunch of times, and we thought, okay, great, they passed this time, and yet He tests them again, and then they fail. Why does He do that over and over and over again? Are you dependent on me now? How about now? How about now? Right? How about in this situation? And you know what? Our lives sometimes seem like that. It's like, I waited all this time to find a wife, and then I found a wife, and I got married. Woohoo, that test is over. I passed that one, and now we can't have kids. Or now I lost my job. Or now, I've got an injury, and we don't know what we're going to do next, right? Like all these things happen one after the other. God, why do you test our faith over and over and over again? It's the reason He tested their faith over and over again. It's preparation for the ultimate trust fall. That got nothing. I know, you don't understand, right? So let me explain it to you. Does anybody know what a trust fall is? I think I've done this illustration before. I've got a friend that used to be here with my right-hand guy. I know most of you know him, Walter. And Walter is a big guy, right? Big, bald head, tattoos all over him, tattoo on the back of his head, and he was a prison guard over here. He still is, but he transferred out and moved away, and we miss him anyway. But what I would do is I would have him do a trust fall, or that was my analogy, right? And the issue is, a trust fall, you fall back and you let somebody catch you, right? And if you've ever done that before, like the first time you do it, you're kind of like, I don't know, do I really trust this person? But like once they catch you, then you're like, oh, okay, and then you can do it at will, fall back whenever you want to, right? Well, the illustration I did was, my daughter Abby, she's not here, so I can say that she's like this tall, Don't tell her I said that. And I would put her up here and I'd say, okay, I want you to catch Walter. And it'd be like, no, and he's not going to do it, right? Because he's going to flatten her, right? But the issue was if you put it the other way around, it's like, okay, Abby has no problem falling back. Once she trusts him, that's it. She can fall back all day long, and he's plenty big enough to pick her up, no problem. He could catch her with one finger, if he wanted to, right? And it's kind of like that. You know what the ultimate trust fall is? Death. Death. Because you can't catch yourself. We're all facing death one day, right? Some of us sooner than others, right? But we don't know when that day comes. And all of our life, right, we're preparing, or God is preparing us for that day. And when that day comes, right, the ultimate trust fall is to say, okay, I trust God so much, and He's delivered so many times in my life that, I can just fall back and let Him catch me without, you know what I mean? And the issues we face in life should show us our need to depend on God in faith. Because, once we do depend on Him, right, these trials then, after that, show us and teach us over and over and help us grow in dependence on Him. It's like the first time I did a trust fall and somebody caught me, it was like I was afraid. But once I did it and this guy caught me 100 times, it's like, oh, no problem. I know He's going to trust me. He's going to be there. I completely trust Him. And as we go through life, that's what all these trials in life are about. That's why God allows us to go through them over and over again, because, one day, it's going to be the real thing, the ultimate trust fall, right? See, if we struggle to depend on God in faith for what's going to happen next week, because we do, right? Or next month, or we struggle with, trusting Him on what's going to happen next year, how will you depend on Him for what's going to happen in eternity? If we struggle to depend on God in faith to provide, a spouse for us, I don't have a spouse, or have a child, or have a way out of the situation that I'm in today that when I think about some of the things I was so worried and concerned about as a kid or as a young adult, I can't even remember them now. But at the time, they seemed like the biggest thing in my whole life. My life's going to end if this doesn't happen. If my girlfriend dumps me, or if this happens or that happens, right? And now, my girlfriend was pregnant, right? Ha ha ha. She made me pay. She married me. Anyway, so I struggle, to depend on God in faith, to do all of these things, to deliver me from these situations. But, if I can't depend on Him through those, how am I going to depend on Him to provide a right standing before God? And trust Him to say that, you know what? My son did all that you need. You are guilty. You are completely deserving of, going to jail because you broke my law. If I was just, and He is just, right? A just judge would send me to prison for what I've done, and a just God would send me to hell for what I've done. That's what I deserve. But because God isn't only just, but also merciful and gracious, He sent His Son to do what I could not do for myself, to die in my place, to live the perfect life that I couldn't live, to earn acceptance from God, die in my place for my sins, and pay my penalty, right, so that I can be right with God, have a right standing with God, not because I earned it, but because He gifted it to me, because His Son earned it and then gave it to me, and His Son took my penalty and what I earned and went to the cross and died in my place, just like a friend throwing themselves on a grenade to save everybody else, right? That's a heroic thing, right? Just like someone saying, you know what, my friend can't pay his fine, and so he's going to be hauled off to jail. Well, I walk into the courtroom, or that's what Jesus did for us. He walked into the courtroom before God and said, they can't pay their fine, but I love them. They're trusting in me, so I took everything I had. I sold it all. I'm going to give it all to pay their debt, and then went to the cross in our place and paid for everything I've ever done and everything you've ever done, right? No matter what's been done to you or what's been done, by you, God sees it and hears it all, and He knows it all, just like He did for Hagar. And yet, He came to Hagar and He showed her mercy. And He comes to all of us and shows us mercy through His Son going to the cross to die for the guilty, me and all the other people that live, right? And if we struggle to depend on Him in faith for those little situations that we go through in our life, even though some of them are really big, right? How are we going to depend on Him to provide a right standing for us, to deliver us from sin, and to deliver us from death? See, here's the big idea. That the tests we face that strengthen our dependence on God, they prepare us for the final exam of our faith. The day when we step through eternity and face Him in judgment. If we go through our lives, just like Sarah and Abraham, that sometimes they pass, sometimes they fail. Sometimes they pass, sometimes they fail. Sometimes they really blow it, and then sometimes they do great, right? But the issue is, they're not right with God by their behavior and what they do. They're right with God through faith and believing, and gift righteousness like we looked at last week and the week before. That God gifted it to them because of His grace and mercy toward them. And it's the same for you and me. And all of the trials, all of the tribulations, all the things we go through in our lives are preparing us. God is preparing us for our final exam. When we stand before Him in judgment and we say, you know what, God? I can't do anything about my life. Maybe you're on your deathbed and you're like, you know what? It's cancer and I'm not going to make it. And you know what? I'm okay with that because I trust you. Because a lifetime of our faith being tested, our dependence on Him being tested, should do something and strengthen our faith until that final moment when we're ready to say, you know what? Here's the final exam, and God, I'm ready. I trust you completely. Because even though I've been faithless and blown it over and over again. You've always been faithful. Let's pray. Gracious Heavenly Father, we pray that you would teach us what it is you want us to learn through the Scriptures. We pray that we wouldn't just look at Abraham and Sarah and Hagar and point our finger at them and say, oh, look at how they blew it, but that we would see ourselves and say, you know what, and we blow it too. We're old perverts, or we're, young gold diggers, or, women who just want whatever we want when we want it, and nobody can tell us anything different, and we're going to get it, And Lord, we pray that we would see ourselves in all of them, and that we would see that the only hero in the story is you, who came to live the life that we couldn't live, sent your Son to die in our place, and made a way for us through dependence in you to be made right with you, even though it's not through our actions, but merely through the gift of your grace. Lord, we thank you for that. In Jesus' name, amen.